Hello, my name is Kirk Borger. I'm the director here at the Riverview Public Library. Today we have longtime citizen Gerry Perry, and he is a longtime citizen of Riverview, resident of Riverview, longtime employee of the city of Riverview, and he has written a book about the history of Riverview. We will be having a book signing on April 10th, Friday, April 10th at 7 o'clock here at the Riverview Public Library. Gerry, thank you for coming today. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate this.
First, let's talk about why did you write this book? And tell me the process of how you had to go about researching it. It's two different questions, I know.
Okay, well, let's start out with why I wrote the book. When I was getting ready to retire, about 2 years before I was going to retire, I said, I'm going to start reading, which I never had seemed to have time all my life, but I started reading. And I wanted to find a book on Riverview. I said, I'm going to read up on Riverview. Well, lo and behold, I looked all over, I came over to the Riverview Library. We have no books on the history of Riverview. Went to Wyandotte, nothing. Trenton, nothing. They've got a lot of books on Wyandotte and Trenton, at Wyandotte and Trenton, but nothing. Even I think you've got Snug Harbor here with Trenton, but I could find no book. So I thought, well, I went to the schools, and their state law says they have to teach local history a certain amount of hours in the high schools. And I checked with the high schools, and they says, well, we've got no textbooks to teach from. Well, I guess the book's going to get written. I'm going to have to start doing it. So that's what I did. I started researching. And my mother, being a past councilwoman back in the 60s, she kept a lot of her papers in the history of Riverview, which is where I started from. And then my research took me to Bacon Memorial, because they've got a real good historical area, and with the newspapers and everything. That's where I got all my research, that in Trenton, thanks to them folks.
So your research was mostly done at Wyandotte and Trenton?
Mostly, yeah.
Did you go downtown to the Burton for anything?
I went to the Burton and I found nothing.
Yeah, the only thing, if I could tell the audience, the only thing I found at the Burton about Riverview was school board records from the 1930s. We probably want to explain to the citizens of Riverview why we don't have anything here. We don't have to. Well, just explain a little bit. Just explain a little bit.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons, and this is one of the reasons we don't have really a historical society, because we have to build on something that's already there, and unfortunately, we just don't have a lot, if anything.
That's true. I had learned, going through my research, that a lot of it was donated earlier to the Riverview Library, but they didn't have a lot of room for storage. And as I understand it, a lot of it was thrown out because, they had to be...
I hope it's somewhere not thrown out.
Well, I hope it's not. It was told to me that it was given to the Burton, but when I went down there, the Burton has the authority to, when you donate something, they don't have to accept all that you give, because a lot of it could be just...
Well, they don't have to keep it. Well, they don't have to keep it.
You don't have to keep it either. So I suspect maybe they called through it. What they wanted wasn't much. And
hence they kept school board records from the 1930s.
Exactly.
I'm hoping that they're somewhere.
Well, if they are, I haven't been able to find them. I've looked high and low.
Yeah.
But,
well, you and I both have looked at the Burton. We both looked at the Library in Michigan.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. However, you've made a good situation out of a bad one, more or less.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And we'll get back to your mother in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But if you could show everybody the book.
There it is. The cover was actually designed by Jeffrey Corns from Jeffrey's Photography. He helped me out a lot too. A lot of people, more than just myself, went into this.
Well, is there anybody you want to mention?
Wally Hayden from Wyandotte Library, and the name escapes me, from Trenton Library. They both helped me immensely, you know, in getting into the archives and everything. And there's people like Judy Bratcher give me free run of all the old minutes at the City Hall, and I really appreciate that. And that's about it.
And Judy was the former city clerk here.
Yeah, and Kerry Morgan, my legal advisor. And of course, Jeff Corns did a lot of the work. Mary Zellner, I shouldn't forget her, because she did a lot of the editing, and oh my gosh, I thought I knew a few things about writing, but I guess I didn't, because Mary went through and edited the whole thing, and she did a great job.
Did you, because I know the one publisher, I think it's Images of America, I believe, that does all those local history books. I believe
I
you
think
would,
it's Attica Printing.
or Attica Printing, yeah. You had taken it to them, but you decided to self-publish it. What was the reason for that?
Well, the publishers have a lot of rules that they go by that I wasn't aware of until I started talking to folks. One of them was I was limited to 138 pages. I had 300 at the time. I didn't realize it. And they said, I'm going to have to cull it down to 138 pages, 65% of which had to be pictures or photos. Well, I didn't have that, so I had to disregard them. I went to the History Press, which did the book on E-course, one book on E-course. Attica did another one, but they did a book on E-course, and they were nice, but they were limited too at what I could do and what they wanted to change. They were going to edit everything and do what they wanted, so I had a bad feeling about it. So I said, I'm going to self-publishing under the advice of Kerry Morgan, who's written a lot of books, and so I did. I went to self-publishing, but I didn't realize there's a lot to when you go publishing a book. There's more to it than just typing it out.
When did this process start? How long did it take you from the beginning of writing the book and until when it was published?
When the first thought, like I said, I would look around and read some books, was about 2 years before I retired, which is in 2006, we made it 2004. I started looking around and then started gathering things all that time, my mother's papers and the city minutes and the libraries. I've been going to the libraries researching all this time. And I didn't complete it till about final edition 2 weeks ago. Yeah, we had an announcement which was premature because I wasn't ready.
In the Downriver Profile.
In the Downriver Profile, and Rod was really nice about it. He put it in his magazine. Well, we were too far ahead, so we had to push it back. So the 10th. That's about it. Yeah.
Let's talk about you for a few minutes.
Okay.
No, because I think it's important for people who know the background of the person who wrote the book. When did you move to Riverview? Or have you lived in Riverview all your life?
I lived in Riverview, lifelong resident.
Okay.
Yeah, we used to live on Pennsylvania Road across from the Singer Farm, which is in the book. And yeah, I lived there, and we moved back to Wyandotte when my grandfather died for about 2 months. And after he died, we came back to Riverview. And been here ever since.
And you've done a lot of things for the city. What did you start out?
Oh, well, I started out doing things for the city with the Goodfellows. My dad got me interested in the Goodfellows back in the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. because he was a fireman, and the firemen and the police did all the good fellow work back then. And that I started out, and then I got on the auxiliary police department, and from there, I worked at the Samsonite Corporation for 8 years. And then after leaving Samsonite, I got a job at the city because every place I used to go to, the Samsonite Corporation went out of business and they moved. And then
Where were they located?
they were located in Ecorse.
You mean Ecorse?
And then I went to a steel place in River Rouge. I got, excuse me now, at any rate, they closed down the part that I was doing. They were building Vietnam cars and cabooses.
Vehicles, right.
Yeah, cabooses and things like that. And they shut down that part, so I was out. So I thought, I read an article in the paper that they were advertising for a dog warden. And I thought, well, they never laid off a dog warden that I know of. So I went and got a job as a dog warden in the police department and landfill and then DPW till 2006 when I retired as Director of Public Works at DPW.
Since you've been a lifelong resident of Riverview, you've seen many changes through the years. We'll get to that later.
Okay.
First, tell me about your mother. When I read the book, I did find it interesting, of course, that a woman was involved in city politics, which at the time didn't happen very often. Could you tell me? Okay, first, what was her name?
Her name was Gerry Perry.
Okay.
And back in the 50s, she, as most people do when they get involved in politics, they don't like something or they're upset of something happening and they get involved, which is my mother. And there was no females except a woman in Wyandotte was a councilwoman. So she decided she was going to run for council, and she did. And back then it was known as the boys club, you know, the old boys club, because there's no women and, well, oh my gosh, women don't get involved in politics, you know, but my mother was different. She wasn't going to put up with that, so she ran and she made it. She organized all the women in the city, you know, and that's where it started. And she was elected councilwoman, and she served for, I think, 2 terms. That was that. So, yeah, she was a different woman. She wasn't a stay-at-home mother. She worked at Hudson's, J.L. Hudson's. She was the head cashier at Hudson's in Detroit for a number of years. When she got out of school, she went there and she worked her way up to head cashier. Then she worked at Gardner Hardware as a buyer for Gardner Hardware, and then she decided that she should retire and do her thing, but then she went into council.
So 2 terms, that would have been, so she served on council for 8 years?
Well,
or what were the terms
let me
for
put
council?
it this way, the council, or the city, that is, was a village prior to being a city. She was on the village, and then when they transitioned to a city, she was the first councilwoman in the city too. The city charter was changed. So.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The Village of Riverview was incorporated, or I might be using the incorrect term.
No, you're right.
Incorporated 1923.
As a village in 1923.
1923.
Yeah, April.
Now, when I read the book, I thought it was an interesting story of why Riverview became incorporated, and that was because of the water.
Right.
So, can you tell us some about that?
Exactly right. The wells began to turn sour.
Why? Oh, yeah, when I read the book, I didn't understand that. Why?
Let's put it this way, the quarry, which the groundwater was heading toward the quarry, would drain towards the quarry, and with the quarry pumping all the water out of the, and all the water draining from the area, groundwater, it caused a lot of the wells to go dry or sour, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to get some water, fresh drinking water, as they called it, from somewhere. And they tried to go to Trenton, but the problem was we weren't organized as a corporation. We were just a Mundwagon township, and to borrow money, no one person could finance getting water here, so they had to incorporate. They incorporated into a village, which gave them the legal right to borrow money to purchase a water system or get the piping system here. And they first started out, them in Sibley, the village of Sibley, which was annexed to Trenton, but prior to that, they tried to get water from Trenton. Trenton didn't have a big enough capacity, so they tried Wyandotte. And Wyandotte, in their negotiations with Wyandotte, somehow Wyandotte changed the rules and the prices and all that, so they decided to heck with it. They went to Detroit and got Detroit water.
Where exactly was the village of Sibley?
The village of Sibley was south of Sibley Road, and it went to King Road. Okay. This was all in Mundwagon Township at the time.
Okay, what years would Mundwagon Township be?
Oh, Mundwagon Township goes way back.
Okay, well,
way back.
it was a territory. Everything was platted out, pretty much.
Yeah. It was a township which consisted of Groseal, Trenton, Sibley, and Riverview. This whole area. And then Groseal was the first one to decide that they wanted to go into their own as a village. And then came Trenton. And then Trenton wanted to annex Sibley. Well, they were torn between going and not going, but they had the water, so they went to Trenton. And Riverview was kind of hanging out there by themselves, and so we went with Detroit.
Mm-hmm. And what I find interesting, actually, is, you know, somewhat ironic. We needed water, and we thought about going with Wyandotte, and now I mean, it's been talked about, but because of the rates of the water rates in Detroit, we thought about going with Wyandotte's water system again.
Yeah.
So I found that interesting.
Yeah, they've been wrestling with that back and forth because of the rates of Detroit. But going into your own water system, in public works as I was for many years, I know what it costs to go into your own water system, and the EPA is constantly changing the rules and updating what you have to do. Now they have ultraviolet treatment. Instead of pouring chlorine and then mixing it up, let it settle, and then sending it out to the river. Can't do that anymore. Now you have to treat it with ultraviolet rays and make sure it's up to certain standards, then you put it in the river, which is drinking water clear.
A far cry from having wells.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which is what the original settlers of Riverview had, was wells.
Oh, yes.
Now,
interestingly enough, though,
yes,
in the wintertime, they would go down to the river, and they cut big kegs of ice, and they would store them in an ice house down there that was cork lined and straw lined, and way into the summertime you could still get ice. And they used to, if you wanted water and your well was gone bad, you just called a truck or a tanker with a team of horses. They would go down the river, fill it up with water, and then they'd bring it and drop it in your cistern, which is a holding tank for water. And that's how they kept water in the old days.
Yeah, because in the book, one of the original, was it the Holmeister farm, or one of the farms they trucked in the water eventually because the cistern went dry. Do you remember what farm that was?
Well, it's Holmeister farm,
okay,
but I think most of the farms operated that way.
Most had to do the same thing.
Had to do the same. Holmeister was the son of Bill, who was Johann's. Went back to the turn of the century. one of the older farms around here. The Brelands were the first. Homeisters, I think, were the second family to settle in the area.
Where was the Breland farm? Let's go over some
Okay,
of
the
them.
Breland farm was, well, the Breland farm was parcels all over the place, not just one farm. It was a farm, and there was a number of Brelands. It started out with Michael Breland, who fought through the Civil War, who came over here, and they remembered it when he coming back from the Civil War. He came back here, and Flat Rock and the whole area, Brownstown, was pretty much a Breland property. And then it was sold off, and along comes Homeister, who bought property, I believe, from Breland, and so on. But they owned a big share of the area around here. Yeah, anything south of Sibley Road, north of Sibley Road was pretty much was
Breland.
Yeah. Now the Homeister farm was located over on Pennsylvania Road in Grange, and they were there in the 1800s.
What were some of the other main family farms?
Oh boy, there was the Rump Farm, Morris Farm, Molnar Farm, and Schendell's Horse Farm. A number of, I don't have all the names, but there's a list of them in there, and there's about 20 of them, all parceled out through the area. Bosman Farm, which happened to be relation to my house, so, and the Morrises were related to me.
Oh, so?
Well, my mother's side, my mother was a Bosman, and her dad was the family of, I believe, 10 or 12 kids, you know, just big families. And the Bosmans married one of the Morrises. My aunt Agnes married a Morris, and they settled over on King Road. They had a farm on King Road, and the Bosmans had a farm here on Sibley Road somewhere. I'm not sure where yet, but they were there.
Like most of the country, it was agricultural. This was mostly agricultural, and I would say it was
And lumber.
lumber. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because there was some company that was, I don't know, or some business that was here because they gosh, I can't think of the business right now, because they located here because of the wood that they would use in their business, and I can't think of what, I don't think.
Manning's
right.
ran a sawmill early in life, and you know, this was all timber in the area. It was good timber too. And yeah, there's an article in the paper on the Singers. They used to do a lot of timber, and my gosh, I can't believe how big those logs were. They were about 3 feet, 4 feet around, some of them, and they didn't have chainsaws back then.
Yeah, there's a picture in the book of that.
Yeah, they didn't have chainsaws back then. And I thought, my golly, how the heck how they even lift them up on that trailers? But they did.
Riverview becomes a village in 1923. What was the population around in 1923?
Well, it went from less than 500 to 1,500 about the time when they 15 to 2,000 at the time we became a city.
And we became a city in 1959. 1959.
Yes.
Now, is that in kind of that period in the 50s and the 60s where Riverview saw most of its population growth or most of its development?
Absolutely, in the 50s. We were just ballooning. I mean, it was explosions. The guys were coming back from World War II, and they needed housing, and we built houses all over Riverview. Holtzman Silverman was a big builder. Rosenhaus, they were all builders, and they built all the houses you see east of 4th Street. Most of them were east of 4th Street, and yeah, we had portable classrooms at one time in the 50s. They had to have lease the house from the builder and made a classroom out of it. Like this was maybe the first grade, that was the second grade, you know, and because they had so many kids and no buildings. And we started building schools.
Right. Was the first elementary school Memorial?
No.
No. Okay. Well, I mean, the first.
The
Well,
first
I
one
mean, the
was
first one
Sibley.
that was built. I mean, like the modern one.
Oh, the modern one
Yes.
was Hale School.
Was Hale School, and,
Hale
and where
School.
was that?
That was over on the corner of Kraus and Longsdorf.
Okay.
It's an empty field, now the baseball field. Now they've torn it down since then. Most of the schools I went to, it's torn down, but at any rate, yeah. And then after that, they built the Huntington School. And then we built the Seats, Downing, and so on. The Forest was one of the last ones to be built.
What was City Hall? The current City Hall was an elementary school.
That was Downing.
That was Downing.
Downing, yeah.
When was that converted to?
Golly, 1986, I think it was.
Okay, mid-1980s.
Mid-1980s, yeah, they knew City
When
Hall.
the school just didn't.
Well, we started losing population.
Losing
and, you know,
population.
yeah, somehow it just reversed on us.
Mm-hmm.
So we,
Well, it stayed fairly stable with
constant.
some decrease.
Yeah, but we evidently overbuilt schools, too
Mhm.
many.
Right.
So we started eliminating schools. First was Hale, then Downing.
Mm-hmm.
Hale School was converted to a Joe Wright for, they don't say handicap anymore, they say challenged.
Right. Special needs.
Special needs.
Right.
Children, yeah. And that's it, as far as schools go, building and then moving to City Hall in 1980.
Where was the original City Hall?
Original City Hall was on, original City Hall was on.
Okay, there's been several City
Yeah,
Halls.
it'd be this one here.
Mm-hmm.
They built that in 1923.
And that was located where?
That was over on Jefferson Avenue. The story of that is kind of nice because they were, the DT&I, Ford Motor Company owned the DT&I Railroad, and they were building new railroads next to the ones that were already there, the New York Central, the Ohio, whatever. They had 3 sets of railroads, tracks already by the railroad, by the Riverview Street. And then DT&I bought a bunch of property east of the railroad tracks to put in another rail line for Ford Motor. Strangely enough, it never did come to fruition, but they bought all that property and either moved the houses or tore them down. There was one house that a lot of the older folks remember as the Poplar Inn, was the old F.B. Sibley house. And the railroad bought that house, and they had a carriage house in the back, a big barn, this building here. And they offered it to the city for $3 if they would move it off the property, and they moved it from behind the F.B. Sibley house, which is on Sibley Road by the railroad tracks, over to Jefferson Avenue, and they converted it to a city hall then. There was a police, fire, city hall, and McGuagan Township eventually moved in there also, the offices for McGuagan Township. And then 1957, 58, they started building the house there, the building on Fort Street, the City Hall on Fort Street, which they moved into and then became a city at the same time, 1959.
And in the mid-80s, when City Hall was down, well, it was Downing Elementary School, like
That's
you said,
correct.
and then
Yeah.
now it's City Hall.
Yeah. But it was a good deal for both sides.
Yeah, I was just
Kinda
about
hard
that.
to
I was
sell
just
it.
about that. I mean, was there any financial transaction on that, or
Yeah,
was it
there
just?
was, I'm not sure just how much, but we gave the school some property, I think it was, in addition to, they gave us we bought the City Hall, or the Downing School, and there was some property exchange there, so.
One thing is several things as I read the book. There were some very interesting plans and companies that were in Riverview. Now they're not there anymore. Actually, one of the most interesting plans I read in the book was for the Speedway.
Okay.
Was the Speedway where okay, and I'm not talking just like a small speedway. This was like an IndyCar size, what you would see on TV for NASCAR or IndyCar, and there was a plan. They had one of those here in Riverview. Could you tell us? Well, okay, for the first question about that, where was it going to be located?
Okay. We're sitting here at the library.
Right.
Across the street, all that property from 4th Street out to Grange Road was pretty much, well, it stopped short somewhere in there, the rum farm. But the rum farm was just east of Grange. And then that property line there was going to be all the way from Sibley to King. There was going to be one huge oval. It's back in 1915. The folks from the Indianapolis Speedway formed a company, and they called it the Detroit Speedway. And they came and bought the property, which what I just explained was. And they bought that property, and they were, as I say, started in 1915, and by 1916, 17, they were out of business because they money.
Yeah, they went bankrupt.
Slowly went bankrupt. Yeah, they went bankrupt. Slowly ran out of money, went bankrupt, and filed bankruptcy. So, and the property sat fallow for so many years, but it was still referred to as the Speedway.
Speedway.
Yeah. And incidentally, the same year, 1915, they also Ferndale Cemetery started. They developed that the same year of 1915. The First Lady was interred from another cemetery. Her name was Johnson. That was the first one buried there. And the monument is still there.
Right. And the photo of the monument is in the book. Also with Ferndale Cemetery, one of the pictures in the book shows kind of a stone gate or entrance. Was that there?
They have, that was since torn down. The gates are still leaning against the garage, the maintenance garage in the cemetery. I talked to the owners of the cemetery now, and he remembers the gates, but they tore them down. They tore it because it was a limited entrance.
It was narrow.
Narrow, and too narrow evidently, so they took it down, and it was probably becoming deteriorated. So they took the gates and the brick piers. They had lighted lights up on top of the brick piers, and beautiful wrought iron gates. It was going to be a real nice, and it was a nice cemetery at the time. But time took its toll on it.
What year? I forget. What year was the cemetery opened?
1915.
1915. There's been something else that struck me, that the first supermarket in Riverview was kind of a big deal, because I guess before that there had been just kind of like the one market. I forget what families had owned it, but it was on West Jefferson.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it was owned by an original family, and then they sold it, and then another family took it over.
Yeah, it was Rushlow. First it was Rushlow's Market, and then the Williams bought it. Levi Williams family bought it, and they had it for years and years. There's kind of an interesting story in some of these stores. There was the Krause Meat Market around the corner. Howard Krause and his dad, William Krause. They owned that, and with the railroad tracks coming through, railroads coming through there was a lot of, I suppose you refer to them as bums. Back then, the railroad bums, they'd get off the train. Somehow they knew that Williams Market was there. That they had a history of. They would go there, and Mr. Williams would feed them a sandwich and a bottle of pop, I guess, and they'd be on their way. And offer to do some work, but he, of according to the Williams, they didn't do much work anyway, but they would feed them when they come in. And then it started with that market, and then along came Food Fair. Had a store there. And
which is on Sibley, where the
National Food Market.
Right.
I'm sorry, it was first. National Food Supermarket came in there and kind of put the Williams on them out of business as smaller markets. And then eventually Yankees, and then which was Farmer Jack, and then A&P was here. They're gone.
Where was A&P?
A&P was over here where the Oakwood Hospital, or Oakwood Healthcare Center is, right over here. Not Oakwood, Family Health Center, at the corner of Sibley and Ford. Yeah, then, like I say, the National Food was first, and next door to National Food was Saunders. Pretty neat, huh? Or, actually, it's right inside National Foods, and then alongside of National Food was a place called Ben Franklin's store.
That was a
five
store.
and 10. And then there was, on the other side was a drugstore, Riverview Drugs, there for a number of years, owned by a fellow by the name of Saul Kushner. Everybody knew Saul, you know, he was the only drugstore around. So
now that building's still there.
Building
It is
is still
bar,
there.
You know, the bar changes his name.
Yeah, it's
and
been
there's a party
J-Dubs
store
and a
right
few
there.
other things, but it's, yeah, that's the building it was in.
Riverview is known for its landfill, and landfill saves the taxpayers a lot of money.
Sure does.
You were a director of the landfill at one time, were you not?
Yes, I was. We went through some tumultuous times. I was on the police department at the time, and I decided that, you know, that give this uniform to a bigger guy than me, you know, so
Well, what struck me about the police department when it first started, I mean, it was just like one or two guys, and they were just.
Well, there was more one or two, but
well,
there was.
They were, you know,
some guys. It was one man on a shift.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was just about to say. It was one man on a shift, and then they appropriated some more money for another police officer who worked the night shift, and
Yeah,
you know, and then the police force has just kind of grown.
Yeah, if I can talk about the police department for a little
Sure.
while, it used to be the sheriff ruled the territory as far as the policing goes. And then when we became a village, quite coincidentally, a fellow by the name of Roy Smith, who happened to be a sheriff at the time, they appointed him as the chief of police when we became a village. And Roy was on for quite a while, and then he became treasurer, judge, and a few other things through time, but after a while. But the police department evolved with just one chief, and he was the police department at the whole time. And then they slowly, like you said, they would they'd hire one more, and then there'd be two of them, and then three, and then four. And about 1950s is when we started getting bigger. There was about 12 guys that got bigger. The landfill, the story on that is that, as I said, with population boom and building schools and the building boom
In the 50s and 60s.
50s and 60s, the city fathers got the idea that, you know, one way to control this is, you know, you couldn't pass a bunch of laws, but if you own the property, you could rule what happens on the property. So the city at the time bought a lot of property, wherever the golf course is now, where the 9 is, all that property, all where the landfill is, the city bought that in a bond issue. It's a $3 million bond issue. They bought all that property. And the idea was, though, how are we going to pay for that? So somebody came up with the idea, I don't want to get into any names because, you know, somebody says, well, it's his idea,
Right.
but I think I know who the ideas were, but that's all right. The idea was we bought the property, we controlled the building, boom, in Riverview, and built the golf course with that, with some of the money, and then they built the landfill. In the 1968, we bought the property and we started knocking everything down. And that's when I left the city police department to go over to the landfill. And Jack Shoup was my boss at the time, and he knew all about it. He was city manager, and when they decided to buy all this property and develop a landfill, Jack had done all the research. He was sharp on all that sort of stuff. He became the landfill. He did boss of the landfill, and he hired me out there. I asked Jack, he's a good friend of mine. I said, "Hey Jack, you got any room for me out there?" And he did. Yeah, he hired me, and then Jack went back as city manager. When you get to that chapter, you'll see what I'm talking about. But Jack was a multi-talented man, you know, and to pay for all this, we started taking in trash, and we had to clear all the property, which I enjoyed doing it. We cleared the property for the golf course. I enjoyed that job, and then Jack went back city manager, and I got appointed the director of the landfill at the time, and I stayed there for a number of years until I became landfill and the DPW director, and it become quite a job.
When did you just become DPW? Or I could ask it, when did they hire just a landfill director?
Well, again, we weren't cash flush at the time, so and we were still trying to generate customers, and the DPW director decided he wanted to go back to a civil service job, so they combined my job as a landfill director, DPW director, and I had both jobs, and that's how I got both of them. And it became way too much to handle because we started getting, you know, we had to go out. I had to go out and solicit customers, you know, run the landfill, DPW, and it was too much.
A lot of work.
Too much. So then Jack Shoup, who was city manager at the time, went back as all casualties of the city manager positions at that time. Jack went back, and I recommended let's put him back to landfill to the new mayor, and he says they all agreed, and Jack got the job as landfill, and he stayed there until he retired. Did a marvelous job. He really did. He made it what it is today.
Yeah, the turnover for city managers was very high in the late 50s and 60s. They even brought a few people in from out of state, and they didn't work out. And then finally, I forget his name, they decided on somebody who stayed for a long time. What was his name?
Harry Coleman.
Yes.
Harry Coleman.
Yeah, because I think he left in the early 90s. Yeah.
Well,
now, what was different about it? Now, what was different? Okay.
Let's just start out with when we became a city. Prior to becoming a city in the village mayor was kind of the czar. He was the head of everything, and then the council, you know, would undersign his whatever he wanted to do. They acquiesced to what he said. So when we became a city, the Charter Commission studied different forms of government in the area, and they decided, and rightly so, that we needed a professional to run the city, which the city charter called for after it was passed, called for a strong city manager, weak mayor.
And the mayor at that time, when we were when Riverview was trying to decide what form of government, who was the mayor?
Well, it was, McShane was coming to the end of his term, and then we switched to the city chartered new city government, and Jim Jones was the mayor at that time. And it was tumultuous times. They could not settle down and work with a city manager type government. We hired something like 7 city managers in 10 years, which is insane. And these were professionals from out of town, you know, and they'd come in here and
there was a couple from out of state.
they were doing what they're supposed to be doing, is running the city, but the politicians didn't care for that, and they wanted to do it their way, and next thing you know, the city manager works at their whim, or mostly, city manager got frustrated and says, I'm out of here. You know, one year you got one, next year you got another, and it just was mayhem. And unfortunately, my boss, Jack Shoup, got caught up in that, and my other boss, George Tier, got caught up in that. It was nuts.
Yeah, because I had seen that Jack Shoup was city manager, then not city manager, then city manager again, or something else.
Yeah, well, he went off landfill, and then they fired the guy who was the city manager at that time. Or no, George resigned. He got frustrated with this whole thing. He didn't want the job in the first place, as you'll read in the book.
Yes.
He didn't want the job in the first place, but he thought, okay, I'll do it until you get things straightened out. Well, things never got straightened out. It was status quo, same old, same old. So George says, that's it, I'm out of here. Well, then they brought Jack back as city manager again, and I think Jack had mixed emotions about that too. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to Jack in a while, but here we go again. You know, didn't last too long, and you know, Jack is out of the job. You know, so he went back to the landfill. Then they hired a fellow by the name of Harry Coleman out of Cincinnati. He was a personnel specialist and second in command in the city of Cincinnati, and so they hired him to come, and they pretty much, council had a turnover, and they made up their mind this is the way they have to.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was the dynamic that changed? Because
yeah, well, change of the government.
Right.
Change of government. And Pete Rodeville became mayor, and Pete was such a nice guy, but you know, he said that's why we hired a city manager to run the building, to run the business of the city, and that's the way it's going to be. And they did. They did. The council had to listen to it because they were getting a reputation.
Well, you can't keep employees like that.
No, I mean, the city manager association, you know, they're all over the country, and this was known as the last stop.
Yes.
Yeah, this was your last stop if you came here. It was the graveyard of city managers, and there wasn't about to get new city managers if they kept it up. So, and Harry Coleman worked with Pete and the council at that time real well. They worked good.
When did Mayor Rodeville become? When was he elected?
Oh, gee, I'd have to check with the book, but anyway, it's in there when he became elected.
Well,
I'm
I
not sure.
estimated.
He
was mayor for a long time.
Let me see. Let me see. It had to be mid-70s, somewhere around there. I'm thinking, yeah, without checking the book. Yeah.
And how he was mayor for a long time?
He was mayor about 20-some years. 20-some years. And things ran rather well.
And you said when you talked, you did it with a Dutch accent.
A Dutch accent.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
Talk about Mayor Rodeville.
Oh, he was a good friend. Good friend. Give me a second here. Pete used to say, yeah, well, anyway, what the hell? You know, those people out there, they elect me and they're happy with me to vote, and he says, I'm happy. He says, as long as they're happy. And, you know, with his Dutch dialect, you know, but Pete was good. was good. You may, if you didn't know him, he didn't come across, but Pete was dumb like a fox a lot of times.
You mean smart like a fox?
Smart like a
Okay,
fox,
you
yeah.
just
Well,
said
yeah, well, you know, when you act dumb, you know,
well, yeah, you feign
people
ignorance.
think,
Yes.
yeah, you feign ignorance, yeah. But Pete was sharp. He had it on he knew what was going on all the time. But he didn't go into the city manager's office, I want it this way, I want it that way. This is the way he ran it.
Or let's work together.
Yeah, let's work together. And he ran it through council, and the council would acquiesce, either yes or no, and they worked together that way. But Harry was good at also working with the council. Some of the things, you know, always, when you're a leader, you're gonna get questionable.
Well, of course.
things that but you have to make a decision.
Mhm.
Beauty of it was, there was decisions being made, where before, it was back and forth, you know. They didn't like what the city manager.
Well, back and
was
forth
doing.
is okay, but something's got to be
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
I mean, a
something's
decision
gotta
has to be
done,
made.
but eventually,
and, well, yeah,
they give a
and
decision, but
and bad feelings can't be, you know,
No,
can't
I mean,
linger once the
no.
decision's been made.
Exactly. But sometimes inaction is worse than no action at all, so, and that's what we were faced with a lot of times.
Well, sometimes doing nothing is the right thing to do as well. So.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Well, regardless, it sounded like Mayor Rodeville and the council and the city manager Coleman, had a good dynamic for those.
I'd
15
say
so
yes,
years,
I'd say so, yes, and we didn't have a big turnover of department heads like
Mhm.
we had back in the '60s.
Oh, yes, I read about that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. We went through, almost, we had to go through Bayless paydays, because the landfill started up.
What's Bayless, okay.
Payless paydays, I mean, or
Oh,
a cut,
Payless, okay. All
a
right,
cut
I
in
gotcha.
pay,
Okay, all right.
and personnel and everything else, police, everybody was walking on eggs there for a while, because the loan for the payback bond issue was dependent on the landfill having customers. DNR wasn't gonna okay the permit, so we couldn't jump any of the, so there was no money coming in, and the payment come due. It was, well, like I say, it was tumultuous times, you know. We had a meeting at schools, they were explaining to us, we're gonna have to take at least a 10% cut, and maybe more, cutting, but what happened was, we got somebody bought the land over on 4th Street. It's now the apartment complex, I mean, over on Pennsylvania Road, apartment
Pembroke?
complex. Yeah, Pembroke,
Mhm.
those, yeah. They bought that property. And then eventually the DNR, the politicians put the heat to the bigger Michigan politicians, who finally put the heat on the DNR to okay that permit. I suspect because the competition around the landfills, privately owned, you know, also had something to do with trying to persuade them to not let that thing open. But we finally got open, and the money started flowing, and then the payless paydays disappeared, or the thought of payless paydays disappeared, and even the cuts.
Mhm.
So that was good. That was good for the city. The landfill's been chugging along ever since, and you know, your rubbish pickups is all paid for
Mhm.
by the landfill, plus, you know, other things that we purchase. But thank God for the landfill.
Well, the city uses the, you know, money transfers from the landfill.
Absolutely,
You know, to run
absolutely,
the
and
city.
rightly so. You know, we,
Well,
you know,
it's a revenue,
you
it's a
have
revenue
to
generating operation.
Yeah, well, it paid for the golf course.
Mhm.
Both of them, the blue 9 and the front 9, the red and gold 9. They paid for that property. Trying to think of what else. Anyhow, you know, we bought vehicles, stuff like that. Yeah, the golden goose laid the golden egg. And, thank God it's still going, because it would cost us a lot more to live in this town.
And on the landfill, there used to be you could ski on the hill? When was that?
Okay. In the, when I was out there, we had after a few years, we started building and it was getting up in the air, and we built a sled hill right off of Sibley Road, at the corner of the WGR Tower, you know where that's at. That small hill there, we had a sled hill. We started building it from that. And then the Sportsman's Den, in a condominium-like situation, they built a clubhouse and the Sportsman's Den. And they just had their 35th anniversary, so that's about when the ski hill started coming into operation. And they put chairlifts. They had chairlifts, a couple of them, and but we come to the sad reality that you can't put snow on a hill that's cooking heat from the rubbish deteriorating, you know, and coming up through. And it was costing us a lot of money to make our own snow, which we had our own snow machines and everything. It was okay, it worked, but it wasn't a profit-making situation. And finally, the Planning Commission approached the council and says, look, we gotta stop. We're spending money that we just don't have.
Probably.
Yeah, I always owe like $500,000 a year, is the figure I heard. And so they finally had to close it off. And we sold chairlifts and the snowmaking machines. Eventually, I think it's going to be a golf course like Point Highlands and a few others where you're going over the hills and everything else. Bob Bovick's the guy.
Wow, yes.
He's in there now, so
right.
Yeah.
You mentioned the WJR building, and in fact, when we've had people who understand what style of building that is an architectural gem.
It is. Art Deco.
I think it's an Art Deco style.
Beautiful.
It was built 1930s, like 1930s.
Late 20s, 30s, yeah, it was built. It was called the Goodwill Station. The name of the fellow escapes me now, but it was located in Pontiac, I believe, and then they moved out here. And a few years, that tower was so tall and so powerful. The farms around here, the sound come through their light fixtures and their wires. Yeah.
I think some of the apartment buildings around have that problem too because of the wiring. They'll pick up the signals in the telephone lines.
I see. Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah.
Sure. And one year they had a pretty bad windstorm and it blew down. And it was probably the tallest structure in Michigan at that time. And then when it blew down, they rebuilt it, but it didn't put it as high. And quite coincidentally, my neighbor, a guy by the name of Wilson, they had to climb it up because he used to have lights on it, not like they do now, you know, the lighting equipment that they have now, but he used to change the light bulbs and climbed all the way up there. That's a pretty good hike.
With WJR, I mean, you can go you can pick up that station just about not anywhere in the country. But I mean that signal is so strong.
At night,
at night especially
all the way down to Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes. You know, just the dead antennas in Riverview.
Yeah,
which I think is really
that's neat, isn't it? Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit. Of course, we're here at the library. Okay. Where was the original library?
Well, the original library happened to be over on Riverview Street in the back of a store, and it was in conjunction with Wayne County and Trenton, cooperative type thing, borrow the books back and forth. But eventually it didn't work out. And then the library, we formed a library commission, and for years they tried to get our own library. We had to go to Trenton if you wanted a bookstore, Wyandotte. So eventually the library commission, Eileen Schramm, driving force, her and Helena Durand, Tim's mom, the mayor's mom right his mom, they were the driving force to get a library here. And they solicited with the, I think the JCs to help them out, push it over the, push it to a vote. And at that time, they were operating out of a storefront on 4th Street. The original Pennsylvania Shopping Center, Pennsylvania Ford Shopping Center was a different one, it was an older one, but they rented a few store fronts and they were operating there. And they got the bond issue passed after a couple votes. It didn't go through right away, but eventually it went through. We built this library over that we're on at now, only it was a different, it was an older model, which is a picture of it is in the book, and eventually became this one here. I was project coincidentally director.
I know this isn't in the book, but that would be in the next book. The problems that we had with the contractor and everything else.
Gosh, yes.
Building a new building, which was in '97.
That's a whole story in itself.
And yeah, the libraries at the time were administered by the county.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this isn't in the book. We stopped being administered. Well, the library stopped being administered by the county in the early '80s.
Right.
Now the land that the library's on, and in back of us is the old Nike missile base.
Correct.
Tell us something. Tell us about that.
In the 50s, the Cold War, fear, and everything, they decided that they had to protect our industries. Detroit was the arsenal of democracy. And so in the 50s, we had the Cold War between, the Russia
Soviets,
and
yes.
Soviet Union and everything. So they built a series of Nike's missile sites. One was in Flat Rock, one was here, one was north of Detroit. Now, our mission here wasn't so much to save Detroit, it was Cleveland and Ohio. In that area, same with Flat Rock, they were designed. Now, Flat Rock had the Atlas missile, which is the big one out here on display. We had the Nike missiles, which were to shoot down the aircraft. The larger missiles would take out a whole area of airplanes coming in if they were. But anyhow, the Nike site was located here in the 50s, and I talked to Bud Burbo. He was working for the Michigan Foundation, who furnished the cement. And he says, my gosh, he says, I think they finished it with sledgehammers. He says it was, the walls were 3 feet thick in some areas. Now, Jack Shoup, the landfill director at the time, was in charge of, when they closed it, gave it to Riverview. Riverview got it, and was going to tear it down. And my golly, you couldn't do it with dynamite, so they just heaped dirt over the top of it and closed the elevators and everything, and that's what you see out here. Those Nike missile sites, there's six pits.
Silos.
Yeah. They're still in the ground. They're still in the ground.
Because it was impossible to move them anyway, or demolish it.
Could have, but my golly, it would have been a monumental
I'm trying to
task.
think how you would do that.
I suppose dynamite
Yeah.
and other things, but you couldn't do that in this area. So, any rate, it lasted from 50 to. It didn't last too many years. Donald Capezza, who was a councilman, he was instrumental in getting this rocket. He was a soldier here.
So was Bob Hale, as I remember.
No, Bob Hale.
No, I thought Bob Hale was. Okay. All
It
right.
was Don Capezza.
Right.
And then Jim Jones, who was the mayor at the time, he was a lieutenant here. And the national, it went from the regular army to the National Guard to closing. And Don was all the way, was stationed here all that time. And I've got most of the history of it from Don Capezza, who gave me his papers, and his wife gave me his papers to use in the book. And they were quite involved in the community. They used to do their parades, as they call it, at the high school football stadium. which there's incidentally some pictures of that. Yeah, Don was instrumental in giving me the history on this. Of course, Don has passed. Thank you.
There's some stipulation with the land that the land had to be used for recreational purposes?
That's correct, that's correct. But we built a fire department on it anyway. And so then they says, well, you can't do that. So then we had to buy property from the Breland farm, which was a lot bigger. In fact, this whole area was the Breland farm, and then the government bought the property and put a Nike site here, and they left them with somewhat still a farm. But then we had to replace the property that was on the fire station. We replaced that with property we bought from the Brelands, which have the Patriots Park now, and all of it's Patriots Park. The school was given permission to buy the north end for the downtown school, right, which is now where City Hall is. And then the Nike site also consisted of a radar site over on Pennsylvania Road, where Rivergate is now. And that's where their headquarters was for sleeping and all that during their off hours. Otherwise, they slept right here in the Civic Center building that you see here behind us. Was one of the I think 4 barracks. I can remember when we were given the property and we were going to demolish most of it, and I had a fellow by the name of Larry Vernier working for me and Ed Weatherall. We brought the landfill equipment over here to tear down this, and we decided to go to lunch. We had gotten down all of them except the one that's standing here, and he leaned up the dozer against it. I said, let's go to lunch. We'll do that afterwards. When we come back from lunch, there was City Manager Jack Shoup waiting for me. He said, time out. He said, we've got orders from the mayor and council that they don't want to tear that down. They want to use it for a
rec center,
which the JCs were instrumental of it at the time of persuading the council to leave it go. So we did. So that's why that building is still standing there. We didn't tear it down.
Well, there was some talk recently of tearing it down, and then it was decided to, now it's going through renovation.
Yeah, now they're going through renovation, yeah.
You mentioned dynamite. Now, the core is, well, it's been in Trenton, but it's been kind of a part of Riverview because of the blasting that has occurred. How long has the quarry been there? Has it been there for a long time?
Well, in the early 1800s.
Okay.
F.B. Sibley owned it originally, and it was sold to the Church family, the Arm and Hammer. The Church family bought it, and then the Foley's bought it. The city of Riverview could have purchased that land because, well, they were going to shut it down because the quality of the limestone wasn't good enough for making cement. Prior to that, they used to truck it out of the quarry up to the Solvay process in Delray and make cement out of it. But when the quality fell off of it, they were going to close it down, and they offered it to the city. All we had to do was put a fence around it. But can you imagine what a fence cost? Yeah, and a hole in the ground. What are we gonna do with that? And so we decided against it. We didn't buy it, and the Detroit Edison bought it, and that's pretty much the quarry itself. But the schools had all the workers from the quarry. Now, they brought in quarry experts from Italy. These fellas couldn't speak English, but they knew mining. And they worked there for a number of years. There used to be a village called Foleyville, right next to where the quarry was. And this being Munguagan Township School District. Now, you can't confuse that with the township. The school district went from King Road all the way to Pennsylvania Road. And it was called Munguagan Township number 1, which was the one on that side of Sibley Road. And number 2 is this side. And all these kids from the families some of them couldn't speak English, but they were there. And there's a story in there from Miss Augustus, which will tell you about, you know, she had to learn a lot of languages, mainly Italian, because most of these kids were speaking Italian.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to Sibley School. Of course, that school that they went to was the third Sibley school. There was two others. One used to be at the corner of Sibley Road and Pennsylvania, or in Fort Street. It was off to this corner. That was the first one. It was built a little wooden schoolhouse, and it progressed to F.B. Sibley donated property and land, and they built a smaller one or bigger one, and then they built the Sibley School, which was eventually was torn down. But all these kids were, you know, the Melantonis, the Sindonis, the Fastinis. I knew all these kids, you know, a lot of them back then.
Did St. Cyprian's Parish exist then?
St. Cyprian's was
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the later ones to come
Mm-hmm.
about. The Methodist, it was started out Episcopal Methodist Church of Riverview, and it started out in a barber shop over on Riverview Street in the back end, and they had Sunday schools there. And then they built a building over. Remember I told you that DT and I bought that property? Well, they had a church there, and they moved it over on Jefferson. And they conducted church business for a long time there on Jefferson, and then they moved it over on Quarry Road, the whole building. And there's pictures of that in there where the steeple was higher when it was over on Jefferson, but now they moved it. They had to take the steeple off, so it was a shorter one. It was on Quarry Road. Then they bought the property they actually exchanged properties with the city of Riverview at the time, and they located over on Colvin Street, which is where they are now. So they were one of the earlier ones, and then St. Cyprian's came in the 50s, which incidentally, the Methodist Church was way back, 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate, then came St. Cyprian's. They conducted business, church. They had masses over at the high school gymnasium for a while, and then they built the church that they're in now, St. Cyprian's. And there was a few older ones than St. Cyprian's. There's the one on Fort Street now. They claim their 50th Jubilee or 100-year Jubilee, or I can't think of it. It's in the book. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, yeah. But at any rate, that was one of the older churches, and then the rest of them kind of just sprouted up, Church of God and a few others.
Mm-hmm.
In the Methodist Church. It's over on Ford Line. Name escapes me now, but they came from Wyandotte. And
Probably this the Lutheran Church, isn't it?
Lutheran Church, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm sorry. Yeah, Lutheran Church. They located in Riverview. They moved out of Wyandotte and came to Riverview. And it was an interesting ceremony that they had when they had a plow, and they were disking up the area for the groundbreaking. So that was, yeah. Churches were an important part of the city. Still are.
Mm-hmm. If you've been a long-time resident of Riverview, you've been a long-time employee of Riverview, and obviously you've seen a lot of changes through the years. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind? I know that's a very open-ended question.
Yeah, other than the wisdom of hiring me as an employee.
Well, that goes without saying, right?
LOL.
Yeah,
You know, yeah,
right,
but,
exactly.
But
Well,
yeah, I wouldn't trade what I went through with Riverview.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask another question. Then that was more about the past. What Riverview is seen as far as demographics is concerned,
Mm-hmm.
is that now our population, about 25% is over 65. No offense.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, yes.
How do you see Riverview changing in the next few years, 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's going to be a bedroom community, and I think, as you see, a lot of the buildings, commercial is closed. We never did have what they call it downtown, other than the shopping center at the time, and now you see there's a lot of empty buildings there. I see it's going to be just apartments and senior citizens. Already we're going to be building a nursing home assisted living complex over at King Road.
Another one. Well, I meant to ask you about that. I'm sorry, I was trying to wind this up, and now that we're talking about this, you know, because, you know, the library does, you know, its own services at the, you know, does things with the nursing homes. And what I've noticed is, for such a small city, we have so many nursing homes and so many retirement homes, that kind of thing. Since you would have a good context, you know, as far as, have they always been here? Well, obviously they haven't always been there, but what do you think the reason for that is?
It's the evolution going on here. Canton and everything, our main industries are gone. So the people that worked in all those factories and all that, you know, you go down from Trenton all the way to Detroit. When I was a kid, if you couldn't get a job by the time you got out of high school and you went down Jefferson, all the Chrysler, everything, you know, all the automobile plants, if you couldn't get a job, there was something wrong with you, you know. Now, you go down Jefferson and they're all gone. Pensalt, in Riverview, Sharples Chemicals, Firestone, all them. You know, at one time, Riverview was the richest school district in the state of Michigan.
Well, that wouldn't, because of the industry that was
Because
here.
of the industry and
small
population.
population.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, they built that high school, of course,
It needs some
it
improvements
needs,
now,
it
yes.
does, it needs an awful lot of improvements. We won't go into that, that's a
Well,
yeah.
we'll be voting on that in soon.
Yes, but at any rate, yeah, we were the richest school district in the state of Michigan with all our industry. Well, now that's closed. The older folks are still here, and there wasn't as much influx of kids going off to college back then in the 50s. You know, you went to be automobile plants and work around here. Well, now, you know, all the kids have gone off to college. Well, they meet some guy from Indiana or somewhere, and they move there, or they want to move out where the different class of people are, like Canton and up north Oakland County, and there, you know, it's just a different makeup altogether, and that's what happens.
Yeah, because see, I came from Oakland County here,
Oh, okay.
So, and I love it here.
Yeah.
So I really, really do.
Yeah.
I really do. I think Riverview's a great city to raise a family. It's small enough, you know, that you do get a sense of community. We're part of the Metro Detroit area, so it's not like there's nothing to do. You can go somewhere to, and you know, I think the community and city government has always done well, not always, but well, because you mentioned the turbulence in the 50s and 60s. I don't know how much of the citizenry that was affected by all of that, but I really think that as an outsider coming in that moved here, you know, I see that the city has been run very well, and that it's a very good community to live in.
Yeah, other than back in the 60s when we went through those.
Well, that's what I was thinking. That's what I
times,
mentioned. That right.
But it was
yeah.
rightly so. They did the right thing.
Yeah.
Just that the money wasn't coming in.
Right.
Now it's a different story, but still the dynamics are changing. We used to have all these volunteers, these clubs. We had Riverview Days. I'm sure the reputation of Riverview Days goes way back, and you may not know that, but we had everything during the Riverview Days. It was a 3-day event, and we had pig races, we had grease pig, I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, and we had ox roasts, we had fireworks, we had a whole myriad of things. We had soapbox races. Fire department had what they called with the hoses, they would spray the ball hanging from a cable, and you know, whichever team, you know, had better aim would push it down the other end. They won. Those types of things. The fire department, police department, everybody was involved. We were a community. But along comes residency. You can't, you know, make a person working here live here, which is fine, but it sure as heck created havoc with all the things going on here. You know, you've got an influx of outsiders coming in, and when they go home, they go back to Oakland County and the fire department and the police department and all that. I can find no fault with that, but it's just that, you know, the sense of community is really a lot different. We used to have a JC's, they're gone. We used to have a, I don't know what happened to the, I don't think the Lions are still going. In groups like that, you know, even the American Legion, you know, I mean, the kids nowadays don't join things. It's the X generation.
Yeah, I always meant to ask, why did Riverview never have a Rotary Club?
Well, you know, we had so many clubs. You
Yeah,
can only draw.
true.
You can
You've
only
only
draw
got so
from
many,
you know, so many people. But
Right.
we did. We had the Kiwanis, JC's, Lions.
Oh, so there was a Rotary Club at one time?
No,
Oh,
we
there
didn't have
wasn't.
a Rotary.
Okay,
No,
all
we
right,
didn't
okay.
have. That's the only one we didn't have was the Rotary. Trenton had a Rotary, Wine had a Rotary.
Right.
But we had all those clubs, you know, and you know, there was just so much you could draw from, and we did have. One time the Kiwanis had 40 to 50 members when I was president back in the 70s. But anyway, we had quite a few members, but now they're limited, they're down, and people just are not joining it.
For what?
For whatever reason, they're just not joining things like that. That's what I think is happening with Riverview. It's a shame, but that's the way it is. Accept it.
You mentioned the shopping centers and the complexes on Ford Street that don't have any businesses in them anymore. Why do you think that is?
Oh, the box stores put a lot of.
Well, that's true.
Big box stores.
Right.
We used to be known as Junk Food Junction down through here back in the 80s.
Well, now we got Coney Island.
70, 80. Now we're the Coney Island capital. Now we're going to be a subway capital, but
Right.
or the what do you call them?
Subway sandwich.
Submarine
Yeah,
sandwiches.
yes.
Yeah. But oh yeah, we had a myriad of restaurants coming down. The Copycat, and, Hardee's, and you name it. We had it. Pizza Hut. But they're all gone. Wendy's is gone. They're all gone. And I don't think we'll ever get them back, to be honest with you. You know, there'll be some, what do they say, small businesses, the average length of a small business is 6 months. I couldn't believe that, but it is. That's what they say. So, and we're caught by that.
All right, Gerry. Well, thank you very much for coming in. Here, let me see your book. Just want to, again, this is Gerry Perry's book, just entitled Riverview, Michigan, from its origins to the 1970s. Gerry did author it himself and put it all together himself, so he is to be commended for that. He's the first one who's collated and put everything Riverview history together, and it was a big job, as you can attest to. We will be having a book signing with Gerry at the Riverview Public Library on Friday, April 10th at 7 p.m. What are you going to sell the books for? How much?
They're
$20. And I'm hoping to see everyone there because I think this is an important thing that Gerry has done. It's the first time anybody's done it, and you have my gratitude, and I'm sure all of the city's gratitude as well. Thank you very much.
I might add this, that some of the proceeds will be coming right back to Riverview Library.
Okay. Some of the proceeds will be coming from the library, so, I mean, to the library.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So we hope to see you there at the book signing. Thank you very much, Gerry, for coming.
Thank
I
you, Kirk,
appreciate
for
it.
helping me out.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
very welcome.
You betcha.
There we go.